There's a narrative building right now, and I want to address it head on. People are saying that the Detroit Lions are going soft, that the grit is gone, that Dan Campbell's bite kneecaps culture is fading. We know this team's history. Detroit Lions fans, we've seen what happens when the franchise loses its identity. It was a disaster every single time. So the question I'm asking today is simple. Is the grit actually gone, or is this just the media doing what the media does? So what does grit actually mean as it applies to the Detroit Lions? Well, if you remember back in 2021, when Dan Campbell was introduced as the new Detroit Lions head coach, he had his famous press conference where he talked about biting kneecaps, and he defined what grit was. And he talked a lot about character and about all these different qualities that the players of the Detroit Lions were going to have. Yet it seems that some people are worried that this might not be the case anymore, that the Lions are losing their edge, that they've lost their toughness. Frank Ragnow's retired. Taylor Decker's retired. They have lost their identity as a team that could punish you on both lines, and now they're kind of struggling to figure out who they are. Let's talk first about the folks who on one side are saying that the grit may be gone. And so one of the reasons that they would say is the retirement of Frank Ragnow. Frank was the heart and soul of that offensive line, and we saw the difference when he stepped away from the game and wasn't there anymore, and it really hurt the team. Taylor Decker being released, that also is something that has some fans worried. In my opinion, it's time for Taylor to move on. However, I don't want to undermine at all what he meant to the Lions team. He was a huge part of establishing that identity, especially coming from the era before that with Matt Patricia, and really he bought in to what Dan Campbell was trying to do, and I think that made a big difference. The Rod Wood controversy is another part of it. If you watched the last episode of Motown Exile, you heard me tell you exactly what I think of Rod Wood and his policies, where he makes it out like people didn't do their job, so we gave them an advance, and we're going to go back and get the money that we them. That's not the case. Sometimes it's the case, okay? With Barry Sanders, it was the case. Barry lost the desire to play. And though it angered many of us, I can understand that. You know, football is a very difficult game. It's a very demanding game. It's a punishing game. And so I don't fault Barry now as I've grown older and more mature, but I understand why the Lions would go after a signing bonus. Now, on the other hand, Frank Ragnow, he was beat to hell. He was so injured that his quality of life has probably changed, not for the better, as he ages and grows old. And I know that he made a conscientious choice to play football, but to go after his signing bonus after he gave his heart and soul for the team, after he played through so many injuries, I think it just makes Rod Wood sound callous and heartless and like he has no soul. And the fact that that is making headlines and that Sheila Hamp seems to be okay with that bothers me. And I think it bothers a lot of other fans as well. Another reason why folks are citing that the Lions may have lost their grit are what many are saying are two bad drafts in a row by Brad Holmes. And you look at it, and on paper 2 years ago when the draft was in Detroit, I think it was universally agreed upon that Terrion Arnold was a steal. For them to be able to trade up to 20 to get him was a big deal, because if you remember at the time, the cornerback position was definitely an area of need for the Lions, so much so that they drafted Ennis Rakestraw in the second round. So they drafted cornerbacks back to back. Well, Rakestraw has been injured and has barely played in his first two seasons. And Terrion Arnold has shown some glimpses of improvement. However, he also has had some off the field issue that ended his season last year. And so he's still a TBD, to be determined. And then there are just some of the other players, the experiments, the wild picks that Brad Holmes has made. I like Isaac Tesla. I think that he's a really good player. I don't agree with the price that he paid to move up to draft him. The Lions don't have a third-round draft pick as we speak together today. And I think that's another issue. So it could impact the Lions' ability to draft and keep that 17th pick because Brad might feel the need to go after a different player to get more picks, to get more players. And that's directly influenced by the trade last year. Now, they could go and prove me wrong, and Isaac Tesla could have an all-pro season. He could end up making the game-winning catch that puts the Lions in the Super Bowl. I mean, there's no doubting his ability, and I do believe Brad found a diamond. I just hope that he didn't find that diamond to sacrifice in exchange for other needs that the team may have had and ability to fill those needs. So those are the arguments that the Lions have lost their grit, that fans who are concerned about the team say that they've lost their grit. Now let's look at the case against the Lions losing their grit is really what that data is actually saying. So the first thing that I'm going to cite as a reason why the Lions have not lost their grit is the signing of Cade Mays. Cade Mays is a direct replacement for Frank Ragnow. And even if Cade Mays is 80% of what Frank Ragnow was at his best, he's got to be over 100% improvement over Graham Glasgow. And Brad Holmes addressed the biggest need on the first day of free agency. So I can't fault him for that. I applaud him for that, actually. I think Cade Mays is going to drastically improve the Lions' offensive line. Then there's the Brian Branch and the Kirby Joseph situation. Now, keeping your homegrown secondary together when the market wanted them, that's big. Now, you can also cite the fact that they have some serious injuries. But some of the whispers that I'm hearing out of Detroit is that Kirby Joseph is actually doing better than we could have hoped for. And Brian Branch is progressing. The Lions did re-sign Avonte Maddox in the last day or so, and he was a great depth piece, and he's going to help hold things down until they're fully functional back in the secondary. So that was another key move. Now, don't forget, going into last season, our safety position was generally considered one of the greatest strengths on the team. So if we can get healthy again, that is going to settle a lot of people's nerves. We really missed Kirby Joseph. He plays, I think, the best center field in the National Football League. He can hang over the top, and he makes quarterbacks who make mistakes and throw ducks, he makes them pay. Ask Brett Favre. I'm sorry. Ask Aaron Rodgers. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, same guy. But seriously, ask Aaron Rodgers. He'll tell you. Kirby Joseph made his life miserable his last season in Green Bay. There's the cap management reality, and as much as we hate to see a guy like Taylor Decker go, Taylor kind of made it impossible to stay. He refused to rework his contract. The Lions, I think, expected him to retire, and they had already kind of shifted in the direction of him retiring. I think the Lions were considering what they were going to do. They didn't want to get burned again like they did with the Frank Ragnow retirement and kind of got caught off guard. And hey, they signed probably 3 players that they wouldn't have been able to sign had Taylor Decker stayed. And losing Taylor Decker might become an afterthought after the draft. Nobody knows what the Lions are going to do, and nobody knows how things are going to play out. There's a few teams that are really hungry for tackles. But as I look at this draft, and as I've done some of my fantasy drafts and some of my simulated drafts, I keep coming up with some diamonds in the rough later in the draft. And even in some situations, some players with top level skill, like at safety, they're sliding to the Lions, and I'm grabbing them. And then I'm going and I'm drafting a left tackle in the second round, or an edge in the second round, and a left tackle in the third or fourth round. And mind you, these are after trades because we know currently the Lions don't have a third round pick, but I think you get the picture. So I think that, again, this is something that we got to let kind of play out. And hey, MCDC hasn't changed. Dan Campbell is the same feisty, competitive guy who, though it upsets some of us sometimes when he gets his balls in the wheelbarrow and he is going to go for it come hell or high water, that's his competitive spirit. He understands momentum. And all the times that it worked for the Lions, we were all super happy, and it made the difference in a lot of games. Now, does he need to do that all the time? I want him to be in a situation where, because the defense is so strong, he can count on them. I want him to be in a situation where he makes that calculated risk to go for it on fourth down, and he's going to be very confident that the Lions are going to convert. So I think Dan Campbell's the same guy. I think that Dan Campbell is hungry. I think that a lot of the moves that Brad Holmes has made, I think, have been in lockstep with Dan Campbell, because I think Dan Campbell, he said it, Dan Campbell tells you exactly what he's going to do. You just have to listen. Dan said at his final press conference at the end of last season that he feels like they lost their edge a little bit, that they lost their compete. And that's something that he established early on, that you were going to have to earn your spot on this team. And that opened the door for guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Kirby Joseph, guys who were drafted not in the first round. Guys who were drafted later. And they earned spots on the team, and they became foundational pieces of this team. So I think that Dan knows what he's doing. While I sometimes question Brad Holmes, I don't question Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell is the best Lions coach in my lifetime. And that alone doesn't earn him the ability to not be criticized. I'll criticize him when he needs it, but he's the right guy for Detroit. He's the right guy. He epitomizes the culture. He's extremely emotionally intelligent. He's got his fingers on the pulse of this team. He knows how to talk to these grown men athletes, because in his heart, even though his body isn't that anymore, in his heart, he still is. In his soul, he still is. He's a compete guy. He wants to be the best. And I think we can trust Dan Campbell. So let's connect grit to what's going on today. So the 17th draft pick is going to tell us a lot. It's going to tell us whether the grit narrative is real or media noise. They could go the edge rusher path. We talked about that. An aggressive attack style edge rusher. Who knows who's going to be there at 17? Or who's going to be available maybe at 15, at 13. Brad Holmes has said, and he has shown us, he will go get his guy. If his guy's there and he's worried someone might get him a few picks earlier, he will go after him. He did it with Isaac Tesla. He did it with Terrion Arnold. I mean, he goes and gets his guy. He did it with Jahmyr Gibbs, and we were all pissed off that he traded up and drafted a running back. Are you pissed off that Jahmyr Gibbs is a Detroit Lion today? I'm not. Jahmyr Gibbs is the best running back in the National Football League, and he might get paid. That's how good he is when running backs aren't getting paid. Not overall. It's a very divided front there on the running back and whether you extend him. But I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is a hell of a Lion. And so he has succeeded in that area before. Some other areas, the offensive tackle path. You know, it's a disciplined, forward-thinking strategy. Does it signal a culture shift? It might just signal that it's the right thing to do. I don't think you can go wrong when you can get an offensive tackle in the first round who you now have for 5 years on a rookie deal. If you want him, if you want to keep him, but you got him for 5 years, that allows you to save a lot of money because let's be honest, The highest 3 paid positions really in the league are quarterback, defensive edge, and tackle, predominantly left tackle. I think Penei Sewell's going to move over to left tackle, to be honest. But either way, I mean, I won't be upset, and it would be a prudent move if the Lions have their guy and he's sitting there in the first round, especially at 17. Now, a guy that the Lions have been high on, and I believe they interviewed, and I'm still trying to figure out a little bit more about this. I just heard about this earlier today. Zion Young, who is a defensive edge prospect out of Missouri. He has a DWI arrest charges. Does he fit the culture, MCDC standard? The Lions have never compromised their character evaluation. Does that fail him from the character evaluation? Those are serious charges, especially for a guy who is supposed to be coming closer to the most important day in his life, where he could slide into the first round or probably at the very least be a second round pick early in the second day of the draft. I think the Lions have drafted guys who maybe aren't the best decision makers sometimes, but they're overall good guys, and they have traits that match the culture. Does Zion Young match that? I'm just saying that's something to watch. Do they take a chance on a guy like him? So here's my final take, my grounded, honest take. Is the grit gone? I don't think so. I don't think so in the way that many people think. I think it's a lot of media noise. I think it's just people trying to invent something to talk about because it's a slow time in sports right now. The NCAA tournament just ended. Go Blue, by the way. Congratulations, Wolverines, on your national championship. So college basketball is over. March Madness is over. There's a little bit of a lull before the playoffs start in the NBA, Major League Baseball. The draft is about 3 weeks away. And I think it's media noise. I don't think it's a real warning sign. I don't. I think that the grit is still there, and it's very close to being regained if the Lions moves pan out. I do. I think it's true. My honest to God thought on the 17th pick, I can go one of two ways. And that's why it's really cool to do the fantasy or the, not fantasy, but the simulated drafts. And that's because when you get into those simulated drafts, you really get a chance to play out scenarios. So I've been playing out some scenarios where I'm getting offers, and I'm telling you that now this is artificial intelligence basically that's drafting for the other teams. It's computerized. I'm drafting as a human being for the Lions, and I'm using Pro Football Focus. I'm using their tool. In the drafts that I've been simulating, there have been up to 8 trade offers to the Lions at 17. And if you look at those offers, the best one that I got was for the Lions to trade back to number 19 with the Carolina Panthers. So the Panthers would get the Lions 17, the Lions would get the Panthers 19, and then the Lions would then get a second round pick in addition. Hey, if a team comes and says, hey, you'll drop down 2 spots, and the Lions believe they can still get their guy, and they can add a second round pick, now you're dealing. Now you're talking here, because if Brad can capitalize the way that he did in his second draft, in his third draft, man, we're talking there. We're talking Brian Branch territory in the second round. We're talking Sam Laporta. We're talking, some really, really good players. Jack Campbell, Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'm excited. Let's see what happens. And really, we're going to learn a lot about the Lions culture on draft night. And as hard as it is to wait, we're going to have to wait. We got to be patient, and we're going to have to see. And then we can talk about it after. We don't have any control over it. That's why I don't get too upset if I don't have to, because I can't control what the Lions do. I know what I want them to do, but, I'm not a general manager or have the skill set to do that. I just know that the Lions are closer than they've ever been. And we are hungry. I get it. I'm desperate for a Super Bowl championship. I'm sure you are too. Hang in there. I think we're going to get there. I truly do. I believe we're going to get there. And just the last thing is, don't forget what it was like when Matt Millen was here. 0-16. The Millen Man March. The Cincinnati Bengals fans taking over Ford Field. The Bengals? Are you serious? Yeah, it happened. And it was tough. We've come a long way since then. We've come a long way since the circus that is and was Matt Patricia and Dan Quinn. I mean, one of the most telling things in somewhat of like an exit interview that Rod Wood gave was when he talked, I believe it was with Dave Burkett from the Detroit Free Press. And in the interview, he said one of the most difficult challenges was a few weeks into his tenure as president, when Dan Quinn came in along with Matt Patricia and talked about some sexual assault allegations that were going to be coming their way towards Matt Patricia. The Lions had not done their due diligence. They were not aware. And they got caught off guard. And they were in no man's land. I mean, Rod Wood had barely met Matt Patricia. And Dan Quinn, I mean, one of the hardest things to do is admit when you made a mistake. And Dan had hitched his wagon to Matt Patricia. And when he did, he sealed his own fate. And I don't know if Matt Patricia is guilty or innocent of those charges. All I'm saying is it was the first of many signs that Matt Patricia was not a good culture fit. We've got that good culture fit. We've got Dan Campbell. We got a general manager who has been successful and who has built the core of this team. We just need to see him make the moves to get them over the top. But either way, I'm excited because we're going to have something to talk about for quite some time, all the way through summer, all the way into training camp and beyond. So I want to thank you all for joining us here today on Motown Exile. If you enjoyed this show, please slap that like button and subscribe. We have a goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers by June the 1st. Again, my name is Ryan Relkin. This is Motown Exile, Detroit sports, anywhere Exile takes you.